Live from the famous Courtroom 23 at the Orange County Courthouse, the 9th Judicial Circuit Court of Florida in beautiful downtown Orlando, it's the finals of the 2014 American Mock Trial Association National Championship. I'm Jeff Thomas of Kaplan Test Prep, and joining me is Josh Leckrone, coach of the University of Cincinnati,
That's all right.
and member of the AMTA Board of Directors. Josh, good to see you.
Great to see you, Jay. Great to be here in sunny Orlando, Florida, to see the two best teams in the country battle it out for the 2014 National Championship.
It has been a tremendous weekend, hasn't it?
It has. It's been a lot of great competition. Great weather, and I'm excited to see one team go away with the Calkins Trophy this weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be a wonderful competition, I'm sure, and we're very much looking forward to seeing the outcome. So we've got a couple minutes to kill before we get the official final match underway.
We have a lot of time to kill. The teams are running a little late. We had to go on live at 5 o'clock, and so we have a decent amount of time to kill. As a matter of fact, the second team has not even arrived yet, but we will go ahead and fill some time.
We'll do our best to keep folks entertained in the next few months. So why don't you talk a few months about how you got involved with mock trial? I know you were on the board now, and it is a passion of yours. You've been involved for many years. Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Well, I competed for 4 years, way back in 1999 through 2003 at the University of Cincinnati, my alma mater. And when I graduated, I almost immediately started coaching as soon as I started into law school. And this is actually my 12th year coaching. And a few years ago, when my mentor, my coach, Katie Pridemore, retired, she suggested that I get on the American Mock Trial Association board. And here we are all these years later. And I'm happy to be on the board. This is the absolute best organization in the country for pre-law students. And it's been a blast since day one.
So tell us a little bit about the size and the scope of AMTA. I know there are thousands of students who compete in tournaments all throughout the country over the course of the spring to eventually get us to the national championships this year in Orlando.
Absolutely. In any given year, we have approximately somewhere in the high 500s, low 600 of teams. Some schools have just one team. Some schools have 2, 3, 4, even 5 teams. When this season started, way back with the case release in mid-August, there were somewhere around 600 teams competing. Beginning in the first weekend of February, Super Bowl weekend, we have 3 steps of tournaments. We have regional tournaments. The top 7 or 8 teams from each regional tournament move on to what we call ORCs. That stands for Opening Round Championship Site. And the top 6 teams at each ORC move on to where we are here this weekend in Orlando, Florida for the 2014 National Championship Tournament. 48 teams competed here, and we're down to the top 2.
That's great. So 48 teams competed over 4 rounds of tournaments over the course of the weekend, right?
That is correct.
And so it's not exactly a head-to-head single elimination tournament. How do we whittle the field down from 48 to 2?
Well, there are 3 judges with scoring ballots in every round, and there were 2 divisions of 24 teams. And what we're about to see here, an incredible matchup of the team that won each division. And that means that they won the most ballots out of 12 on their side in their division.
Sure.
And we'll introduce them here momentarily, but they each competed in 4 rounds and earned the right to go here.
That's great. So why don't we talk a little about the teams that have made it to the finals? We've got a little bit of a, do I dare say, a David versus Goliath situation orchestrating itself here? I don't know. They're both champions.
They are. They are both champions of their divisions. On its face, on paper, it looks like a little bit of a David versus Goliath situation. The 2 teams we have competing, for those of you who are not following on Twitter and Facebook this weekend, are the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. And their opponent today, and this is Princeton University. And as you can see on the monitor, we have UCLA coached by longtime board member and Hall of Fame coach Gonzalo Freitas. Team captain Ian Lampert, who, if you're watching at home, is really someone to watch this weekend. Probably the most visible member of the UCLA team, and a captain or a member of the team that won the national championship 3 years ago. He was a freshman on that team. He's the only member of this team that was on that national championship team 3 years ago, and he's here to bookend his time at the University of California, Los Angeles, if you will.
That's not a bad career.
No, it is not. To speak a little bit more about UCLA, who will be going defense in today's round, UCLA has won 3 national championships, 2004, 2005, and as I just mentioned a few years ago in 2011. UCLA has, prior to this weekend, boasted 27 All-Americans. A very storied history, one of the strongest programs in the country, year in and year out. How they got here this weekend. UCLA qualified 2 teams out of regional tournaments, one out of Fresno, one out of Claremont, one at a record of 7-1, one at a record of 7-0-1. Of course, that one being a tie.
Sure.
At Orcs, UCLA competed at the Newport Beach Orc. They went 6-2 and made it out to the national championship tournament this weekend. UCLA, if you're following the BBR, how we rank teams in AMTA, UCLA is technically the 3rd ranked team in the country, which is very high. And it should be noted that UCLA, this is their 4th time in the national championship round, they've never lost.
Wow. Undefeated record in the big game.
Undefeated record in the big game. All 3 previous wins, however, came in the cornfields of Des Moines, Iowa.
Okay.
So
no home court advantage tonight.
No home court advantage for UCLA. We'll see how their particular brand of mock trial plays here in Orlando. Obviously, it's played well so far this weekend, but we're bringing in some new judges, some big-name judges who we'll talk about in a moment.
Absolutely.
With specifically this weekend, it's been a good run for the University of California, Los Angeles. They have a record of 9-2-1. What that means is they won 9 ballots, they lost 2 ballots, and they tied a ballot. Those wins came 3 wins over Rhodes, a traditional powerhouse of mock trial, an excellent win for them. And as anyone will tell you, it's difficult to win 3 ballots over any team in a round. So that's particularly impressive. They had 2 wins and a tie versus University of Florida. They had 2 wins versus Northwood University and 2 wins versus NYU. If you're counting at home, that is 3 former national championship teams that they played this weekend. And they were rewarded. Mr. Lampert may not have gone away with an All-American Attorney Award, but Kyle DeCamp, another one of UCLA's attorneys, went home with an award this weekend. And, any national championship tournament you attend, UCLA is always in the running. This is absolutely no surprise that they're here.
UCLA, a proven powerhouse, here at the Big Dance one more time, hoping to defend their crown and bring home a 4th trophy to add to the collection.
Absolutely.
But it's not going to be an easy road, I'm sure.
It is not. And as I mentioned earlier, on paper it seems like UCLA could be a favorite here.
Sure.
And certainly many of those watching at home are expecting a UCLA victory. But that's why we play the games, because their opponent today, representing the state of Midlands, is Princeton University, coached by Robert Marshall, team captain Carolyn Kitchener. Miss Kitchener won 2 All-American Attorney Awards just an hour ago at the banquet, both an attorney and a witness. So she's a double threat.
Wow.
And so she's really the who we're looking for on Princeton's team. And I say this isn't an easy road for UCLA Bruins, because Princeton has amassed quite an astounding record this season. Princeton qualified out of the Newark, Delaware regionals with a record of 7-1. They qualified out of the always very difficult Washington, D.C. Orcs with a record of 6-1-1, 6 wins and 1 loss and a tie. And as Princeton sits here today, they have a rank of 67. So that's quite different from the rank of 3 held by UCLA. Sure. But again, that's why we play the games.
That's exactly right.
As a matter of fact, Princeton didn't even compete at last year's national championship tournament. So these are a fresh group of kids for the first time ever for a Princeton team competing in the national championship final round. But I say that UCLA's task today is a tall one, because Princeton's record this weekend is frankly stunning. They have won 11 ballots, 0 losses, and 1 tie.
That's
they didn't lose
incredible.
a single ballot all weekend.
Wow.
Stunning. I mean,
Unprecedented, perhaps?
I'm not the person to ask that.
Fair
I haven't been
enough.
around long enough, but it's certainly in the past several years very unprecedented. Sure. It is so rare to win 3 ballots in a single round. To do that in 3 different rounds, and in the 4th round not even lose a ballot but tie a ballot, it's pretty amazing. And I would not bet against them if I were betting. More specifically this weekend, the the Princeton Tigers had two wins versus Chicago with a tie in the first round, 3 wins over Arizona State, 3 wins over Penn State, 3 wins over Pomona. And they find themselves here with this record of 11 wins, 0 losses, and a tie. Earlier I mentioned Miss Kitchener, who won an All-American Award as both an attorney and a witness, and Mr. Brandon Holt, who won an All-American Witness Award. So, frankly, I'm excited. These are 2 astounding teams, and I think the judges got it right this week, and I think the 2 best teams are in this courtroom ready to do battle.
I have had the great opportunity to watch some of the preliminary rounds this weekend. It's hard to say preliminary rounds of the national championship, but we have seen some stellar competitions thus far, and I cannot wait to see what happens in the courtroom today. Now, for those that are uninitiated and may not know exactly how mock trial works or about the case that we're going to see, we are seeing a case in which Princeton is playing the prosecution or representing the prosecution. We have UCLA that is representing the defense, and what is amazing to me is these students, they have to prepare both sides of the case. And when did they find out which sides they were going to be representing tonight?
Well, barely an hour ago.
Unbelievable, right?
When it is unbelievable. There's a lot of nerves that go into this. Yep. This is a lot of pressure, and these students literally flipped a coin at the banquet about an hour ago and determined who was going to do which side, who was going to call which witnesses. And they got in their cars and they came over here, and in a few moments they're going to be mic'd up on national television watching, with a national audience watching them online, I should say. I don't know that we're necessarily on TV.
Maybe someday. It's your one.
Maybe. That's my goal, if things go well. So they really haven't had any time to even prepare, even think about what they're about to do. They're just going to go in there, leave it all on the line. And they're all champions to an extent, but one team will walk away with the call.
Something tells me they'll rise to the challenge just fine.
Absolutely.
So give us a little preview of the case that we're going to hear about today. I'm curious as to how the process of writing the case comes together, and give folks at home a little peek at what they have to look forward to that we'll be arguing about later on this evening.
Excellent question. This year's case is entitled State of Midlands versus Whit Bowman. Unfortunately for the viewers at home, I haven't read the case in about 6 months. So my knowledge of the case is a little behind the times. There have been several changes since the time it was written. But these cases are written by a committee. The American Mock Trial Association has a civil case committee and they have a criminal case committee. This year is obviously a criminal case. And a group of 5, 6, 7 board members sit down. Usually there's a submission from a student or an attorney or someone outside of the board who gives them an idea, and the committee sits down and writes the case. This case is no different. This year's case committee chairs were Tom Parker and Jason Butler, both from the Commonwealth of Kentucky. They have written an excellent case. The case balance has been great all year. And what I mean by that is the prosecution wins versus defense wins have been pretty even pretty much throughout the year. There has not been a huge bias for one side or the other, which is the goal of AMP to do that. And more specifically with this case, we have a lowly park employee by the name of Whit Bowman, who was arguably just minding his or her own business, got involved with the wrong person by the name of Cameron Poole. Allegedly, the two cooked up a scheme to defraud the park of some money through a wristband scheme. And it was found out. And when the proverbial crap hit the fan, Cameron Poole grabbed the money, robbed the ticket taker at the front of the park, and attempted to escape. Unfortunately for Mr. Poole, and more unfortunately for the security guard Winston Thomas that followed him, they entered what was called the Tunnel of Terror. Shenanigans ensued. Officer Winston Thomas was struck by one of the cars, and unfortunately later died of his injuries. Unfortunately, Cameron Poole escaped and is at large and was nowhere to be found, and most assuredly is sitting on a beach in Mexico somewhere. But left holding the bag, literally, is Whit Bowman. Yep. And Whit Bowman is on trial for engaging in the scheme to steal money from the park, helping Mr. Poole escape, and Whit Bowman's been charged with felony murder. And for those of you not terribly familiar with criminal law, felony murder, you can be guilty of felony murder if, in fact, someone dies in the commission of a felony. Even though you didn't intend to murder someone, if someone dies in the commission of a felony, you can be charged with felony murder.
Sure.
And so that's essentially the case we're hearing today. There are plenty of witnesses to be called. The teams have decided which witnesses they're going to call, which order. I'm not going to comment on those until they actually happen. But suffice it to say, you can see from the live feed, there's going to be some characters today. And the folks at home are really going to enjoy what they see.
Josh, is it any coincidence that a travesty at a theme park is at the center of a case that is being tried here in Orlando, Florida? The viewers
It is coincidence. It is coincidence. I don't know for sure that that was done with coming to Orlando in mind. Perhaps it was. I'll check on that and get back with the viewers. But Rockter World Amusement Park will never be the same. Named after one of the founders of the American Mock Trial Association, really? Don Rockter, also from Iowa. We've had great fun with the case.
That's
great. Been a great case.
It was a fun case to read, get to know a little bit, and watch in some of the preliminary rounds this weekend. We should mention, this is a fairly obvious point, but the case is, of course, fictitious. Names, locations, etc. Any bearing to real folks is purely coincidental in nature. Everything else about this is taken incredibly seriously, though. We are in one of the most famous courthouses in all of the state of Florida. We are arguing in one of the most famous courtrooms inside of this building. The students have studied the rules of evidence intently, and they're prepared to go to battle just as if they were in a real court of law sometime after they graduate from what is sure to be a prestigious institution across the country.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you can see from the live feed that the students are slowly getting things together. You see in front of the whiteboard current AMTA president Dr. Glenn Halva Neubauer taking in the proceedings. There in the right of your screen is Will Warahay, the Tournament Administration Committee chair. He's our eye candy this weekend. A lot of the ladies in AMTA like him. We're being told by the TAB director, Jonathan Woodward, who is just off camera, that we have an approximate start time of 5:25. There's a nice close-up of Dr. Glenn Halva Neubauer, the head coach of Furman University, a stalwart in the mock trial community, and as I mentioned, current president. His tenure ends today. A new president takes over for this year's board meeting in the next 2 years, and it's been a great run under Dr. Halva Neubauer. We've grown leaps and bounds under his care.
I'm sure he's pleased with the outcome of the tournament thus far, and we look forward to a great final match. Let's talk a little bit about the process of what we're actually going to see tonight. So we've got a trial that's about 3 hours in duration, but we should break down it into a little bit more component parts and have folks understand exactly what they'll be seeing when the trial gets underway. So perhaps we can pull up the run sheet of exactly what's going to happen in the trial, and you can talk us through the procedure.
Apparently we don't have that, so we're going to keep going.
Giving away our behind-the-scenes secrets.
I've got this. I've done this a million times. So what viewers at home are going to see this weekend is essentially first a short pre-trial. There will be some documents tendered to the bench, introductions made, things of that nature. That'll take 5, maybe 10 minutes, just some logistical things. Sure. And then each side will give an opening statement, 5 minutes each. Pretty short, but for the purposes of what we're doing here, in real life those would be much longer, as with everything else we do. But you have to keep in mind time constraints. After that, the prosecution will call 3 witnesses. They'll have 25 minutes in which time to get all 3 witnesses' direct examinations done. Then the defense attorneys will have 25 total minutes to cross-examine those 3 witnesses. We'll take a short break, which time you and I will comment on what's going on, what we like so far. Then the defense will call 3 witnesses. They'll have 25 minutes, again, to do their direct examinations. The prosecution will have 25 minutes to cross-examine their witnesses. We'll take another break. And then we'll have closing arguments. Each side gets 9 minutes. The prosecution is permitted time to give a rebuttal if they so choose to. And that's that. What will happen after that is the ballots will be taken out of the room. They will be brought back into a side room where they'll be tallied. There are 5 judges, and we'll speak about them in a moment. But there are 5 judges. Each ballot will be tallied up, and whoever wins the most ballots, our esteemed tabulation director, Mr. Jonathan Woodward, will enter the room. He will announce who won the tournament, and that team will take home the ginormous.
I was going to say.
It's big.
It's huge.
Yeah. True story. In the late 1990s, I think Maryland actually tried to concede the national championship just so they didn't have to pay to take that thing home.
Just for the sake of not getting it back.
They didn't want to take it home.
We don't cover the transportation rates for the trophy?
No comment. No comment. It travels much like the Stanley Cup. It is, I know because I saw a picture of it next to bunk beds this weekend. It's the size of a small set of children's bunk beds when it's in its case and shipped. And we lost it like 2 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, we found it. I think UPS lost it.
There she be in all its glory.
There she is, and right next to her is the runner-up trophy, whose name, sadly, I cannot remember at the moment, but that is the runner-up trophy.
Also some size to her. It is substantial.
Indeed. Both are substantial, one slightly larger than the other, indicating who did better in that round, of course.
Fair enough. So I believe we're getting a little bit closer to getting underway. So we'll be handing over the proceedings to a presiding judge and a team to help score the competition throughout the course of the evening.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about them.
The presiding judge this afternoon is Judge Alex Farrar. He is born in Havana, Cuba, a former lawyer and police officer, and what many of you may know, the host of the nationally syndicated court show, Judge Alex. He'll be ruling on all the objections this afternoon, and he will also have a ballot in his hands scoring.
He has done 1,345 episodes of a syndicated talk show, which is 1,344 more than us.
That is stunning.
So perhaps we can get some pointers from him at the end of the broadcast tonight.
I had a little lunch with him earlier. He gave me some tips, and I'm ready to go.
That's great.
The second judge is Dean Emeritus Bruce Jacob. Mr. Jacob is from Chicago, Illinois. He was an assistant attorney general for the state of Florida in the 1960s. Mr. Jacobs actually argued the case of Gideon versus Wainwright before the Supreme Court, which is, for those of you at home or in law school or prepared to go to law school, a landmark Supreme Court case which assured the right of every criminal defendant to representation. Stunningly impressive case. Dean Jacob, I had a lovely conversation with his wife on the walk over. They actually spent the last 40 or so years in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm, the state where I'm from, as a professor at Ohio State.
Very nice. Next we have Judge Deborah Nelson.
Judge Deborah Nelson is a circuit court judge right here in this building. She was born in Miami Beach, Florida. She is a judge of this 18th Judicial Circuit. And you can hear in the background some students are chanting. They're getting ready to go. Judge Nelson most famously presided over the state of Florida versus George Zimmerman. And that's where most people will recognize her from. She got a lot of TV time for that. Yeah. So.
Very nice. Our fourth judge, Judge Jose Rodriguez.
Judge Jose Rodriguez was born in Cienfuegos, Cuba. He is a alumni of our host, University of Central Florida, and he is a judge of the 9th Judicial Circuit here in Florida. A very accomplished jurist in his own right.
And lastly, filling out our judging roster tonight is Was that the last one?
That was not the last one.
We have one more, I know, right? Correct.
That's fine.
That's okay.
Apparently there are some technical difficulties,
Sure.
but our final judge is Judge Charlie Rose.
Yes, indeed.
We don't want to forget about Judge Rose. Not the TV personality, but in fact a very distinguished director of the Center for Advocacy at Stetson University School of Law right here in Orlando, one of our other sponsors this weekend. And we're so excited to have this excellent, amazing panel who are being led into the courtroom very shortly. There's Professor Charlie Rose. As you can see, he's taught trial advocacy for the National Institute of Trial Advocacy, University of Notre Dame, and even to the United States Army.
Okay. It looks like we're just about ready to get underway, and so perhaps later on after one of the breaks we'll talk about how the scoring actually takes place and how we determine a winner. But I think we're just about ready to go into the courtroom and get the proceedings underway with pre-trial motions and opening statements. So any early predictions before we cast it over?
Well, if I'm a betting man, I'm going to go with experience.
All
I'm
right.
going to go with UCLA.
Very nice. We'll hold you to that at the back end.
Thank you.
Let's toss it over to the courtroom and get things underway.
Well, it looks like that we're going to wait a few more moments. We've got a few more minutes. We've got some time to kill. Luckily, the thing I do best is talk.
Yeah, no kidding. It's great. We can fill this time without a problem. Let's talk about the scoring of the situations. We have a few moments here. So it's really easy to think that actually we're ready to roll. So I'm getting the signal that we are ready to begin the trial.
The esteemed panel's walking in. Let's turn it over.
We'll hold that question.
Good evening, Your Honor.
And Anna Neerman.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Ian Gabriel Lampert. To my right is Miss Carolyn Paris-Bear.
Good evening, Your Honor.
And to her right, Kyle Gomez de Camp.
Good evening, Your Honor.
We represent our client, Miss Whitney Bowman, in today's matter.
Good evening.
State ready and defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. Before we get started, we do have a few pretrial matters.
Go ahead.
First, we have a few documents to give to you to reference during today's trial.
Okay, if you can approach the clerk and provide him with the documents, please.
Yes, Your Honor. We have a copy of the indictment, the special instructions, the Midlands Penal Code, the stipulations, the order on motions in limine, the Midlands case law, and a copy of the Midlands Rules of Evidence.
I'll make sure to read those completely before you start your case.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Any other matters from the state?
Yes. At this point, I'd like to invite the court's attention to that first document I just handed you, the indictment.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, for count 1, murder, we will argue that Winston Thomas was killed as a direct and proximate result of the defendant's actions. For count 2, robbery, we will argue that the defendant was complicit to the robbery that took place in Rockter World on August 30th. For count 3, theft by deception, we will argue that the defendant accomplished theft by lying to park employees on August 30th.
Keep in mind, robberies first and murder second, but point taken. Do you have any preliminary motions before we proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. At this point, we'd like to invoke Midland's Rule of Evidence 615, which just calls for the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, with the exception of the defendant and a party representative from the state.
Defense?
We have no objection to that, Your Honor.
Okay, the witnesses are instructed that the rule of sequestration has been invoked. They are to exit the courtroom and not discuss the case with anybody at this time until instructed otherwise or the completion of the case, and counsel are to instruct their witnesses accordingly, okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any other motions from the state?
Just one more thing. Would you like us to ask permission before approaching the witness, opposing counsel, and the bench?
How do you normally do it?
That's what we usually do, Your Honor.
We'll go that way.
Thank you.
Okay.
And with that, the state is ready to go.
Defense?
Just a few more matters, Your Honor. If I may invite the court's attention to the indictment concerning count 3. The grand jury has charged my client not with theft by deception merely on August 30th of 2012, but between April 30th and August 30th of 2012. If the state intends to only contend that my client acted in this theft by deception on August 30th, then I'm curious as to how they'll clarify this third count.
Your Honor, if I may respond to that.
Yes.
The indictment does not say that it must be continuous between April 30th and August 30th. August 30th is between those two dates.
I'm sorry, I missed that. The indictment reads count 3 between April 30th and August 30th, 2012 in Breckinridge County, state of Midlands. Whit Bowman committed the offense of theft by deception, and it goes on.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, and your response to the defense counsel is August 30th is between April 30th and August 30th?
Yes, Your Honor. That's the theft by deception that we're concerned with today.
You're not alleging an ongoing theft by deception over a period of time?
No, Your Honor.
Is there a reason why it wasn't indicted as just August 30th as opposed to a range of time?
I don't believe so, Your Honor.
Okay. There, you have your answer. It's August 30th.
I believe so, Your Honor.
Any other motions?
Just one more document to tender for the court's convenience. It's a notice of intent to offer character evidence. The state has already signed this notice of intent. If I may approach and tender?
Yes. The prosecution has seen the notice?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Okay. Notice of intent to offer character evidence. The defendant will offer evidence of his or her own character or trait of character. The prosecutor will offer evidence of prior crimes, wrongs, or acts under 404B, and the defense will offer opinion and or reputation evidence of character under 608A. Everybody's in agreement?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
State, you may proceed with your opening statement.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court? Opposing counsel? Members of the jury. The defendant was standing behind the controls. On August 30th, 2012, the defendant was standing behind the controls of a ride called the Tunnel of Terror at an amusement park right here in Midlands called Rock to World. It wasn't the ride the defendant usually worked. It wasn't the ride the defendant was supposed to be working that night. In fact, it was a ride the defendant was explicitly forbidden from operating. But on August 30th, the defendant needed to be there because she had a plan. Just after 8 p.m., her accomplice, a man named Cameron Poole, came into sight. Mr. Poole was holding a knife in one hand, a bag of money in the other, and had just robbed the park's ticket booth. Mr. Poole is being chased by the park security guard, Officer Winston Thomas, and the two men were running straight towards an open door in the Tunnel of Terror ride. They ran past the defendant and into the ride, and the defendant knew exactly what she was supposed to do. Right when Mr. Poole crossed the tracks of the ride, the defendant turned the lights off. In the darkness, her accomplice managed to escape through an emergency exit in the back of the Tunnel of Terror. Officer Thomas tried to follow him, but unable to see, was struck and killed by the oncoming ride. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, throughout the robbery and the escape, and in the moment that Officer Thomas was killed, the defendant was standing behind the controls. For her role in what happened on August 30th, the defendant is being charged with 3 crimes: theft by deception, robbery, and murder. But as representatives of the people of the state of Midlands, we can't just throw out accusations. Today, we're going to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty of those 3 crimes. For the charge of theft by deception, we're going to show you that the defendant and her accomplice stole more than $500 at Rock to World by lying to park employees on August 30th. For the charge of robbery, we don't have to show you that the defendant was the one holding the knife or carrying the bag of cash. We just have to show you that the defendant conspired with Mr. Poole to commit robbery. And for the charge of felony murder, all we have to do is show that Officer Winston Thomas was killed during the robbery that the defendant and Mr. Poole conspired to commit. We're going to call 3 witnesses today to prove those 3 charges. You're going to hear today from Billy Isaacs. Mr. Isaacs is a former employee at Rock to World and worked on the Tunnel of Terror on August 30th. Mr. Isaacs is going to tell you that on August 30th, the defendant insisted on taking over his ride. And when Mr. Isaacs refused, the defendant lied. The defendant told Mr. Isaacs that their boss, J.C. Longstreet, told him to take over. But you're going to hear today from J.C. Longstreet, and he's going to tell you that that simply is not true. He never told the defendant to take over the Tunnel of Terror. And Mr. Longstreet's going to tell you today that the defendant was explicitly forbidden from operating that ride. Finally, you're going to hear from Tyler Hartman. She's going to tell you exactly what happened on the ride on August 30th because she was there when Officer Thomas was killed. She's going to tell you that when the defendant turned the lights off, Mr. Poole escaped through an emergency exit at the back of the ride, the same emergency exit she heard the defendant talking about just days before the robbery. At the conclusion of today's trial, my co-counsel, Caroline Kitchener, will come before you with closing arguments. At that point, it will be clear that from the moment Mr. Poole walked into the ticket booth to the moment he escaped through the emergency exit, the defendant was standing behind the controls. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chow. Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. Something's missing from that story Mr. Chow just told you. Now today, the state's going to tell you a number of facts that we as the defense don't disagree with at all. You see, it's true. In the summer of 2012, Cameron Poole stole money from Rocker World. It's true. On the night of August 30th, he held up the ticket booth at knife point. It's true. That night, Cameron Poole got away. But something's missing. Evidence. Evidence that my client, Miss Whitney Bowman, was ever involved in Cameron Poole's crimes. Members of the jury, this is Whitney Bowman. Today, you won't hear any evidence that Miss Bowman benefited financially from Cameron Poole's actions. You won't hear any testimony that Miss Bowman was anywhere near the park's ticket booth when Cameron Poole robbed it. Today, the victim of that robbery won't take the stand and give you a first-hand account linking anything that happened to Miss Bowman. And that's why, members of the jury, today, it's important to consider everything you're going to hear. To pay attention not just to everything you will hear from the state, but to everything you won't hear. Because the state just told you that Whitney Bowman intentionally turned the lights off on Cameron Poole to help him get away. But what you'll learn is that something's missing. And you'll learn that from Miss Beckett Conroy, an amusement park owner herself, who will tell you that the Tunnel of Terror ride Mr. Chow just told you about actually used to be at her own park, Rules Rivertown, before she sold it back in 2008. She'll let you know that the reason she sold that ride in the first place is because its control panel was faulty. She'll inform you that she'd seen two of her own employees make the mistake of hitting the light switch on that control panel when they were trying to instead turn out the lights. The evidence will show that although Miss Bowman may have been behind the controls, members of the jury, she didn't intentionally turn the lights out to help her alleged partner in crime get away. It was just a simple mistake. But that's not the only thing that's missing. The state just told you that Whitney Bowman helped Cameron Poole get away, but you'll meet a man by the name of Mr. Lou Eccles. He works security at Rocker World, and he'll tell you about some security changes he made in the summer of 2012. He'll tell you that each and every employee knew where to find the key to the back door of the Tunnel of Terror ride, knowing that they could get out in the case of an emergency. He'll let you know that every single employee at Rocker World knew that security would be stationed out in front of the ticket booth. With that in mind, what the evidence will tell you all is that Cameron Poole knew that he couldn't escape by going out the front entrance. Cameron Poole knew where to find that key to get himself out of the back door, and only Cameron Poole had the intent to commit these crimes. But members of the jury, even more is missing. The police. Not a single officer of the law will walk through that door today and take that stand. Members of the jury, you won't hear about the investigation that went underway to place my client under arrest. In fact, you'll meet a man by the name of Jack Hunter. He'll tell you that he called the police with information about Cameron Poole's involvement in the robbery. But the police only ever questioned him about Whitney Bowman. He'll tell you that when he had nothing else to say about Miss Bowman, the police hung up on him, members of the jury. But Mr. Leweckels will corroborate this story. He'll tell you that he was interviewed by the police on the night of the robbery, and again, the police only asked questions about Miss Bowman. When he tried to tell them anything else, he was threatened with arrest. Think about what they're trying to hide from you when they don't call the police here today. Think about what's missing. Today, it's important to remember that it comes down to the state to show you a clear picture that shows that my client, Whitney Bowman, is responsible for Cameron Poole's crimes. They have to prove this to you beyond a reasonable doubt. The highest burden of proof in our legal system, and a burden of proof that the evidence just doesn't support. That's why at the end of the trial, we're going to ask you to find Miss Bowman not guilty. Because something's missing from that story Mr. Chow just told you. Proof.
Thank you, Mr. DeCamp. Let's take one moment for paperwork.
Two impassioned first opening statements there.
Yeah, pretty standard opening statements. They got their witness calls out there. They laid out the facts. Nothing earth-shattering happened. Nothing to write home about. Both were excellently well delivered. Nothing too surprising in there. Two clear-cut themes. Mr. Chow and Princeton's standing behind the controls, and Mr. DeCamp's on behalf of UCLA saying something's missing, and that what's missing is evidence, proof. And, I don't think either side won a real advantage from those opening statements. I think we're still pretty much on an even keel, and we'll see what happens with the prosecution's witnesses.
The felony murder charge recently added just for finals competition, as I understand it.
Correct.
How much do you think that impacted the opening statements?
Greatly, because you have to change your entire case, no matter which side you're on. It's a whole new charge. 3 months ago, Winston Thomas was alive, and now he's dead. And that's a huge change. It went from a robbery to a felony murder. So these are fairly new opening statements, no doubt. But again, solid opening statements. Nothing very aggressive. Not a lot of showmanship per se, but what you would expect from two very high quality teams.
Any surprises in the selection of the witnesses?
I'll be honest, I was hoping to see the defendant. I wanted to see someone cross-examine the defendant. I think that's the highlight of any of these cases. No surprise that they're not calling her because it does provide an opportunity for an excellent cross-examination should the prosecution be able to pull it off. But I'm not surprised at all. These are two teams that made it here probably on the strength of a lot of good witnesses, and they've called a lot of character witnesses. You can see just seated behind the attorneys, we've got some characters coming up. So I'm not surprised at all.
We see Judge Fair deliberating right now and filling out a score sheet. What exactly is he looking for when he's evaluating the effectiveness of an opening statement?
Several things. Substance. Number one, is what you're saying correct? Are you laying out a good theory of the case, facts? He's looking for delivery, whether you deliver it well, and frankly, other things. How you move, how your hand gestures are, things of that nature. Just overall presentation.
Judge Rodriguez, need more time? I know you're translating from Spanish to English in your head, so I want to give you,
A little banter from Judge Farrar.
State, call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Tyler Hartman.
Hartman, you've been sworn.
Thank you.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Of course. I'm Tyler Hartman.
Ms. Hartman, what do you do for a living?
Well, right now, I just sort of take work where I can get it. I'm sort of a jack of all trades, you could say. But I used to work at Rock World.
You used to work at Rock World. Do you still visit the amusement park?
Well, of course. I have a bunch of mates from when I used to work there. So I've been visiting a couple times a week for the past few years.
Ms. Hartman, you're our first witness. So I want to give the jury a better understanding of some of the people and places we're going to be talking about today. What exactly is Rock World?
Well, it's an amusement park. You know, it's sort of like a low-budget Magic Kingdom, but dinosaur-themed.
Were you at Rock World on August 30th, 2012?
Well, I was. That day I was on the ride that hit Officer Winston Thomas. It was terrifying. I believe that's why I'm here today.
Ms. Hartman, let's take a step back. What time did you get to that ride?
It must have been about an hour before closing time, so around 8 p.m.
And what ride was that?
It's a ride called the Tunnel of Terror.
Could you tell the jury a little bit more about the Tunnel of Terror?
Of course, it's your basic indoor roller coaster. It involves a small set of cars that run along a track, and all sorts of scary things pop up along the way.
Now, when you got to the Tunnel of Terror, could you see who was standing behind the controls?
I could. It was Whitney Bowman.
Do you see Miss Bowman in court today?
I do.
Could you identify her by where she's sitting and an article of clothing she's wearing?
Sure, she's sitting right over there at the end of that table. She's got brown hair and she's wearing a gray cardigan.
Your Honor, let the record reflect that Ms. Hartman has accurately identified the defendant.
Record will so reflect. You may proceed.
Now, after you saw the defendant standing behind the controls, what did you do?
Well, I got onto the ride. I was in the first car.
What happened next?
Well, as soon as I got onto the ride, I heard this loud bang.
When you heard that loud bang, could you see what the defendant was doing?
I could. She was just staring at the controls, and then our ride started.
What happened when the ride started?
Well, as we were moving, I saw two people run into the ride.
Did you recognize those two people?
I could. The first one was Cameron Poole. I knew him because he worked the ticket booth that summer.
What about the second man?
The second was Officer Winston Thomas.
Could you tell where those two men were headed?
Well, Officer Thomas was just barreling after Cameron. They were booking it toward the back of the tunnel.
What were you doing?
Well, I couldn't do anything. I was strapped onto this ride. I kept yelling, "Stop, stop."
When you were yelling stop, what was the defendant doing?
She didn't do anything, just kept staring at the controls.
What happened next?
After that, I saw Cameron cross the tracks of our ride, and then all of the lights went out.
What happened after the lights went out?
They were screaming, crying. It was terrifying. And I felt the front of my buggy hit something. I'll never forget that thud.
Miss Hartman, could you tell what that thud was?
I could. When the lights came back on, I saw Officer Thomas lying across the tracks, but he wasn't moving. It looked real bad.
Now, I want to be very clear on this point. Did the lights turn off before or after Mr. Poole crossed the tracks of the ride?
After. It was right after.
Ms. Hartman, have you ever been on a ride at Rock the World that operated with the lights off?
I have. I know from my days at working at the park that it's something called blackout mode.
Could you tell the jury what blackout mode is?
Sure. It's a maintenance feature of the ride. Basically, all of the lights go out, but the ride keeps going at full speed.
Do you know how to put a ride at Rock the World into blackout mode?
Objection, improper opinion.
Overruled. Members.
Ms. Hartman, I'll ask the question again. Do you know how to put a ride at Rock the World into blackout mode?
I do. An employee at Rock the World actually shows me how to do it.
Which employee showed you blackout mode?
It was Whitney Bowman.
And we've talked about the defendant and Mr. Poole. Have you ever seen the two of them spend any time together at the park?
Well, of course, practically every time I saw Whitney that summer, she was with Kevin. The two talked all the time. I mean, they were real chummy.
Have you ever heard the defendant talking about the Tunnel of Terror?
I have.
Could you tell the jury what you heard?
I overheard Whitney tell Kevin, "Don't worry, I have a plan. There's an emergency exit door at the back of the Tunnel of Terror, but we'll have to worry about the lock."
When did you hear this conversation?
A few days before August 30th.
Thank you, Ms. Hartman. I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Okay. Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
Good evening, Ms. Hartman. My name is Carolyn Paris-Bear, and I just have a few questions for you on behalf of Miss Whitney Bowman.
All right.
I want to start by talking to you about something you told us on direct examination.
Sure.
I wrote it down to make sure I got it just right. You told us that the lights in the Tunnel of Terror went off just after Cameron Poole crossed the tracks of the ride, right?
That's correct.
Well, I want to clear up the timeline of what happened that night.
Sure.
Now, when the two people started running onto the tracks of the ride, you started yelling, didn't you?
Well, I called out to it that maybe we should stop the ride. We didn't.
So you called out to Miss Bowman that she should stop the ride.
That's correct.
Well, you also called out that she should put the ride into emergency mode.
Right. Emergency mode is what every park employee is told to do in emergency situations. It's when all the lights of the ride turn on and the ride stops. But that isn't what happened.
Well, I just want to be very clear, ma'am. It was only after that you yelled to Miss Bowman to do what every park employee should do in an emergency situation that the lights went off, right?
The lights went off after.
Well, then I want to talk about what you saw when you saw Cameron Poole running on the tracks of that ride.
All right.
Now, Cameron Poole, he wasn't holding a knife, was he?
I didn't see a knife.
You also didn't see him holding a bag of any sort?
I didn't see a bag.
You didn't see Cameron Poole gesture at Miss Bowman in any way?
I didn't see him gesture. I just saw him run through the tunnel and out of the emergency exit door.
Well, you didn't hear him yell anything to Miss Bowman, did you?
I couldn't hear him yell anything. I'm not sure if he did.
You didn't even see Cameron Poole look at Miss Bowman while he was in the Tunnel of Terror, did you?
He was looking toward the path he was running at, which was the emergency exit door.
Well, then let's talk about Miss Bowman. Now, you told us that she was in the control panel of the Tunnel of Terror when that was happening, right?
That's correct.
And you told us that you had a clear view of her while this was going on.
I could see her for parts of the ride.
Just parts?
That's correct.
So you didn't see the moment when the lights went off, right?
Well, when the lights went out, I couldn't see much. The lights were out.
So you couldn't see Miss Bowman when the lights went out?
No, I couldn't. As I said, the lights were out. It was hard to see.
So you couldn't see Miss Bowman operating the control panel when the lights went out?
I couldn't. I'm sorry if I'm not being clear. When the lights were out, it was dark. I had trouble seeing.
Well, you also told us about that emergency exit in the back of the Tunnel of Terror?
I did.
Miss Bowman, she didn't follow Cameron Poole out that exit, did she?
No, it was at the controls of the ride.
Well, after you got out of the ride, ma'am, you actually saw Miss Bowman standing off to the side, right?
That's right.
Miss Bowman wasn't running away.
No, she wasn't.
She wasn't smiling.
No, she wasn't smiling. We were all pretty scared, I think.
Miss Bowman was pretty scared.
Sustained.
Well, in fact, Miss Bowman was standing there with her hands over her face, wasn't she?
That's right.
Well, then I want to talk about something else that happened right after you got off the Tunnel of Terror ride on August 30th.
All right.
Now, you were interviewed by a detective that night, right?
I was.
And that was the detective Francis Kimball, wasn't it?
That's right. Detective Kimball.
Well, this Detective Kimball, he started asking you questions about what had happened that night, right?
He asked me all sorts of things, like what I've been telling you, what time I got to the tunnel, what happened, that sort of thing.
Well, if you don't mind, I want to clarify what exactly the detective asked you.
Well, sure.
Now, the detective asked you about what had happened on the Tunnel of Terror, right?
That's right.
He asked you about the events at Rockterworld the night of August 30th.
That's correct.
But Detective Kimball didn't ask you about Haley Floyd, did he?
No. He just asked me about what happened on the ride.
Detective Kimball never asked you anything about a knife?
No, he didn't ask me about that.
Detective Kimball never asked you anything about a bag of money?
No, he just asked me about my experience on the ride.
Well, hang on, ma'am. You say that Detective Kimball asked you about your experience on the ride.
That's correct.
But isn't it true that this Detective Kimball never once mentioned the name Cameron Poole?
He didn't mention Cameron Poole. He just asked me about what happened, who was working the ride, that sort of thing.
So he asked you about who was working the ride, ma'am?
That's correct.
But not about the man who was running through it?
He didn't ask me about that.
Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Hartman. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Paris-Bear. State, any follow-up?
No redirect, Your Honor. Can Ms. Hartman be excused?
Yes, Ms. Hartman, you may step down. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Let's call your next witness, State.
The state
Oh.
called.
Sorry. Let's take a moment.
Sure.
Pretty solid witness there from Princeton, Tyler Hartman. Excellent job of the witness tying in their theme of she was behind the controls, both in the direct and the cross. I thought that was excellent. I'm not in love with her Irish accent. I think it was Irish. It kind of came and went. Her emotion was good. I like the crying. It puts a, some emotion into the case because someone is dead. I wish the accent was a little bit stronger. Paris-Bear's cross-examination was excellent. It was pretty long, considering the substance of what the witness talked about. There wasn't a whole lot to talk about. Paris-Bear's cross-examination, while excellent and was so well delivered with the hand movements and the tone of voice, but pretty long. The one real takeaway from that whole exchange was that Judge Alex Ferrer, much like on television, not letting the students respond to objections. That's really going to take some weapons away from these students who are good at objections.
It'd be interesting to see when we get to the hearsay objections in particular how that plays out, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm curious to find out if he's going to permit any arguments with regards to objections.
And it's an important commentary here because we are judging not just the attorney performance, but the witness performance here as well, and seeing how they get into character and embody the folks that are on trial.
Absolutely. The witnesses get scored both for their direct examination performance as well as their cross-examination performance. So they're just as important to this proceeding and to the outcome of this proceeding as are the attorneys.
100%. It is amazing to watch and to remember that these are not law students. These are not attorneys. These are undergraduate students in a court of law, showing up many experts.
Absolutely, absolutely, and of course these are the two best teams in the country this year, and they're showing it. And I think Judge Farrar is about to get the proceedings back on order.
Next witness. While we wait to resume here, we do have some running commentary going on the AMTA Twitter feed as well. And want to invite folks that are watching along to send us your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you think about the trial, too. Just simply go to Twitter and use hashtag AMTANCT30. That's AMTANCT30. And we'd be able to see your comments and perhaps respond to them live on the air later on today.
Sure, we may read some of your comments, we may answer some of your questions. Feel free to tell us how you think things are going, tell us who you think's winning the round, or feel free simply to insult the commentators and the job we've done today.
Yeah.
We're ready for it. We can take anything.
Evan Gerstein right now is watching and munching in a sunny Orlando afternoon. Hope he's enjoying the beach. Perhaps one of our competitors from one of the teams.
Most likely, most likely. I think there's probably a lot of competitors here in Orlando sitting by a pool or on a beach with a cold beverage.
This name calls William Isaacs. Before we begin, may I set up a chart in the courtroom?
Have you shown the chart to the defense?
Yes.
Okay. No objection?
No objection, Your Honor. Just a point of order. When counsel uses that chart, may I reposition myself so as to better see it when she uses it?
Yes, feel free to reposition yourself.
Thank you,
Co-counsel
Your
may also do the same. Good afternoon, Mr. Isaacs. You've been sworn? Okay. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
All right, my name is William Isaacs, but you can call me Billy.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Isaacs?
Well, I'm a bartender down at the local bar called the Chuggies.
Have you ever heard of an amusement park here in Midlands called Rockter World?
Oh, yes, ma'am. I used to work down at Rockter World until I got fired after Whit Bowman took over my ride.
You mentioned the defendant. How do you know Whit Bowman?
Well, we worked together down at Rockter World.
While you were working at Rockter World, what did you do?
I was a ride operator, excuse me.
What exactly does a ride operator do?
Well, it's really just as simple as it sounds. We operate on the rides, make them start and stop.
Did you operate any ride in particular?
Yes, ma'am. I had the Tunnel of Terror.
Permission to approach opposing counsel and the witness in turn with what has previously been marked as States 1.
You may proceed.
Would Your Honor like a copy?
It's an exhibit you're showing the witness?
Yes.
Yes, please.
All right.
Thank you.
No problem. Mr. Isaacs, could you tell us what I've just handed you?
This is a picture of the control panel at the Tunnel of Terror.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of that control panel as you remember it on August 30th of 2012?
Yes, ma'am, it is. It even has the graffiti on it, just like I remember.
We offer States 1.
Defense.
Without objection, Your Honor.
Okay, comes in as a State's Exhibit 1.
Permission to publish to the jury?
You can publish to the jury.
I'm sorry, I only have 3 copies. Oh, I'll just leave it here. Permission to show an enlarged copy of States 1?
Go right ahead.
Lastly, permission for the witness to step down to make use of States 1?
You may step down, Mr. Isaacs.
All right, you want me to come down there?
Yes, Mr. Isaacs, thank you.
All right. Stand right here.
That's perfect, thank you. Could you show us, using this picture, exactly how you would turn the tunnel of terror off and on?
All right, well, to turn the ride on, you're going to press this green button marked start and number 1. And to turn the ride off, you're going to press this red button marked number 2 and stop. Don't worry about hydraulic unit. That's not important, just the button.
What does that blue lever over there do?
Right here by Billy.
Yes, that one.
Oh, well, that's the maintenance lever. That puts the ride in what we call blackout mode.
What is blackout mode?
Well, blackout mode is when all the lights on the ride turn off, but the buggies on the ride are still moving.
Would you, as a ride operator, normally operate the tunnel of terror in blackout mode?
No, you don't use the maintenance lever as a ride operator.
Have you ever put the tunnel of terror in blackout mode, Mr. Isaacs?
Well, one time when I made a mistake.
Could you show us, using this picture, how you would use that blue lever to put the tunnel of terror into blackout mode?
All right, well, you're going to grab hold. Well, I'm right-handed. Let me switch sides. Okay, now you're going to grab hold of this here lever, and you see the track right here. You're just going to pull it on down, and all the lights have turned off.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacs. You can retake your seat.
All right.
Now, Mr. Isaacs, you just told us that you had used the tunnel of terror in blackout mode once before. When did that happen?
Well, that happened on my first day working at the park.
Was there anybody around when you put the ride into blackout mode?
A few of the employees were on the ride. Luckily, no customers.
Was the defendant one of those employees?
Yes, Miss Bowman was on the ride.
And when you initiated blackout mode, did the defendant say anything?
She did. She said how awesome it would be if we could make blackout mode a usual function on the ride.
You also mentioned that you were fired from Rocker World.
That's right.
When did that happen?
Oh, that happened right after I let Whit Bowman take over my ride on August 30th.
Was that the first time that you had let the defendant operate the tunnel of terror on your behalf?
No, Miss Bowman had taken over from me before. This was just the first time she insisted.
When did she ask you to take over the tunnel of terror on August 30th?
Oh, she asked me about 3 times. I guess the first time was right before lunchtime, right before I got my hot dog.
When she asked you that first time, what did you do?
Well, I didn't need her to take over the ride. My grandchildren were fine, so I didn't need to go look after them. So I stayed at the Tunnel of Terror.
When she asked you a second time, what did you do then?
I still didn't need her help, so I stayed at the Tunnel of Terror.
after the defendant asked you a third time, what did you do, Mr. Isaacs?
I stayed at the Tunnel of Terror because I didn't need her assistance.
Mr. Isaacs, how many times that day did the defendant stop by your ride?
Well, in total, she had to come by about 7 or 8 times.
Was that normal?
No, well, Whit and I usually talk maybe 1 or 2 times a day, to check in on me, but 7 or 8 times now, we weren't that friendly.
You mentioned before, though, that the defendant did end up operating the Tunnel of Terror on August 30th.
That's right.
If you refused every time that she asked, what changed?
Well, the last time she came over to the ride, she told me that Mr. Longstreet, the boss, said that she was going to take over the tunnel.
Hearsay under Rule 805.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
Whip Bowman's own statements are admission by party opponent and therefore not hearsay. The statements made by Mr. Longstreet are not being used for the truth of the matter asserted, but rather to show subsequent action, exactly why Mr. Isaacs let the defendant take over the Tunnel of Terror.
Overruled. You may proceed.
I'll ask the question again.
All right.
Mr. Isaacs, what changed to allow you to let the defendant operate the Tunnel of Terror in your place?
The last time she came, she told me that Mr. Longstreet, that's the owner of the park, said that she was going to take over the Tunnel of Terror and that I could go on home and get a full day's pay.
Mr. Isaacs, I want to be very clear about this.
All right.
Did you ever hear your boss, Mr. Longstreet, say that you could leave early?
No, Whit Bowman told me.
Did you hear Mr. Longstreet say that the defendant could take over the Tunnel of Terror?
No, Whit Bowman told me.
And after the defendant said that you could leave, what did you do?
Well, I packed up my lunch tin and I was heading out the park.
Before you let the defendant operate the ride, did she say anything?
She asked me a question.
What did she ask you?
She asked me if blackout mode was still working on the Tunnel of Terror.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacs.
All
No
right.
further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you,
Would
Ms. Niromand. Defense?
Would opposing counsel like me to take down the chart?
Are you going to be using the chart?
She can leave that up, Your Honor, and we're also going to be setting up another demonstrative before the cross-examination.
You've seen his demonstrative aid?
Yes, I had.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is this visible to everyone?
Your Honor, may I also reposition myself
Yes.
when necessary? Thank you.
May I proceed?
You may proceed.
Good evening, Mr. Isaacs.
Good evening, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How about you?
I'm well, thank you for asking.
Sure. Now,
All right.
I've just got a couple of questions for you about August 30th of 2012.
All right,
I want to talk to you about how exactly that day started for you.
okay,
You had a conversation with your boss, J.C. Longstreet, that morning, didn't you?
that's right.
Now, what you learned is that the back door to the Tunnel of Terror was to be locked from that point on, right?
That's what I heard.
Mr. Isaacs, you're the primary operator of the Tunnel of Terror, aren't you?
I was.
And given that, it was your responsibility to keep that door locked up, right?
I suppose you could say that.
You were given the one and only key to that back door, weren't you?
Well, they put it at the control panel at the Tunnel of Terror.
Sir, you were in the control booth for most of the day on August 30th, though, right?
That's right, right before closing time.
While you were in the control booth with that key to the back door, you noticed that the door seemed like it was opening and closing throughout the day. Right?
That's what I saw, yes, sir.
And so you went to go relock it up, didn't you?
I did.
Well, Mr. Isaacs, isn't it true that you saw someone behind that emergency exit door on August 30th?
I did. I saw Cameron.
You saw Cameron Poole behind the emergency exit door on August 30th?
That's right.
Well, Mr. Isaacs, did you ever see Whitney Bowman behind the emergency exit door on August 30th?
No, I didn't see Whit until she came and asked me some questions.
Did you ever see Whitney Bowman and Cameron Poole interact with each other at all on August 30th, sir?
No, not on August 30th.
Did you ever see Whitney Bowman hold the key to that back door of the Tunnel of Terror ride?
Hold the key? No, I didn't see that.
Well, sir, you tell us that when you saw Cameron Poole on August 30th, he seemed angry, right?
Yes, sir.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation to the state of mind of Cameron Poole.
Overruled.
So you tell us that on August 30th, Cameron Poole seemed angry.
That's how it looked to me.
Mr. Isaacs, tell the members of the jury, on
right.
August 30th, did you ever see Whitney Bowman seem upset or angry?
Upset? No, not that I can remember. Seemed like a normal day.
Well, you mentioned to us on direct examination how she spoke to you, what was it, 7 or 8 times?
That's right.
Well, Mr. Isaacs, isn't it true that on August 30th, while she was speaking to you that much, you didn't think much of it?
Not at the time, no, sir.
So at the time, you didn't think much of it, sir?
Not at the time.
Well, Mr. Isaacs, I want to go ahead and shift gears and talk about the control panels of the Tunnel of Terror and another ride at the park called the Mind Eraser.
All right, what you want to know?
Well, you're familiar with both of them, aren't you?
Well, I worked on both of them.
And you have to know the controls of the different rides at the park when you're a ride operator, don't you?
That's right. They trained us to press the on and stop button.
You think you'd recognize a copy of the Mind Eraser's controls if I showed them to you today, sir?
Yes, you have a picture?
I do, sir. Let me grab that for you.
All right.
Your Honor, at this time, let the record reflect I'm approaching opposing counsel with what's been marked for identification purposes only as Defense A.
Okay. Record will so reflect.
I've just got a couple copies of this. Permission to approach the witness with the same?
You may approach.
Mr. Isaacs, I've just handed you Defense A, a
All
copy
right.
of the Mind Eraser's control panel.
Counsel,
Is that
do you have
accurate?
a copy for the court?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a copy for the court?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
May I? Thank you very much.
So have I just handed you a copy of the Mind Eraser's control panel, sir?
That's what it looks like to me.
Is it fair and accurate?
Yeah, just like I remember. This
Your
one
Honor.
got the graffiti on it, too.
Certainly, sir.
All right.
Your Honor, at this time, we would like to move Defense A into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. Comes in as defense's first exhibit.
Permission to publish a smaller copy to the members of the jury,
You may publish it.
and then make use of an enlarged version of that same picture for the witness's reference.
Proceed.
Mr. Isaacs,
Yeah.
this is the same picture I've handed you, just larger, right?
That's it.
Mr. Isaacs, you tell the members of the jury that the Mind Eraser's control panel, it has more buttons than the Tunnel of Terror's control panel, right?
Yes, it does.
And the stop button on the Mind Eraser's control panel is on the right side of the panel, isn't it?
Yes, it is. On the right side, right above the start button.
And it's on the bottom half of the control panel, isn't that true?
It's in the lower right corner.
It's in the lower right corner, sir.
Yes.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the Tunnel of Terror's control panel, what you were talking to your attorney about a few minutes ago.
All right.
Right here in the bottom right-hand corner of the Tunnel of Terror's control panel is the blue maintenance lever, right?
That's right.
And what you told us is that when you hit that lever, the lights go out.
Yes, that's called blackout mode, so the lights have turned off, but the ride is still moving.
Well, Mr. Isaacs, you know that as a ride operator, you're not supposed to put the ride in blackout mode under normal circumstances, right?
I do know that.
And like you were telling us a few minutes ago, you made the mistake of hitting that lever one day when you weren't supposed to.
That's right, on my first day when I wasn't paying attention.
On your first day on the job, you hit this lever when you were instead trying to hit the stop button, right?
That's right, my intention was to hit the stop button, and I wasn't paying attention, so I hit the maintenance lever.
I want to talk to you about the circumstances under which you made that mistake, sir.
All right.
When you made it, was there anyone running through your ride?
Running? No.
When you made that mistake, Mr. Isaacs, was anyone screaming at you to shut the ride down immediately?
No, they don't scream at Billy.
Well, Mr. Isaacs, when you made that mistake of yours, no one was firing a gun in your direction, right?
No.
you tell the members of the jury that it was just a simple mistake.
That's right, I wasn't paying attention.
Mr. Isaacs, you tell us that you spoke to the police about everything that happened on August 30th, wouldn't you?
I answered their questions.
Well, they asked you some questions about who was operating the Tunnel of Terror.
That's right.
That was Whitney Bowman, right?
Yeah, she took over the ride for me, so I left, so it wasn't me.
They asked you questions about who was operating the Tunnel of Terror that night, but did they ask you a single question about the man that ran through it?
The man that ran through it.
Cameron Poole, sir.
Oh no, they didn't ask me that.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacs. I appreciate your time.
All right, you too.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions at this point. Would opposing counsel like me to take this down?
Do you have any follow-up?
No, I don't, Your Honor.
Okay,
I can
let's-
take down our charge.
Certainly, I'll
Move
take
down
this one.
the charts, and Mr. Isaacs, you may step down, sir. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Is the witness excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
And, Your Honor, before the next witness is called, permission to retrieve the document I handed the witness.
Yes. Mr. Isaacs, would you do me a favor? Grab those 2 documents on your way out.
All right, I'll get them.
Thank you. You can give them to Mr. DeCamp.
Here you go.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacs. I
I
appreciate
think
it.
one of them is yours, one belongs to the state from the prior witness.
I can grab that one. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Sure.
Would you like a copy as well?
Yes. Thank you.
No problem.
Kyle seems in control there.
Yeah, another strong witness. Good character. I love the character. At this rate, though, I think that there might be 2 deaths at Rockter World Amusement Park this year. He seems to be on his last legs. I got to be honest with you. If I show up at the front of a line of a ride and that gentleman is operating it, I'm not getting on.
Fair enough.
I don't know if anyone's going to survive that ride that day. But in all seriousness, a good witness. A good direct examination, got a lot out. The cross-examination was strong. The dreaded cross-examination demonstrative. No witness wants to see a demonstrative used on them in cross-examination, and UCLA, Mr. DeCamp used it very effectively. If I'm being honest, the only thing I didn't like about Kyle DeCamp's cross-examination is the shirt and tie combo he's wearing. Doesn't match at all.
Interesting critique.
It is. I don't like it. He's an All-American attorney, though, so it's in his purview to do whatever the heck he wants.
In your coaching role, I do want to ask you a question, though, about the casting of the witnesses. I saw Billy Isaacs played earlier today by a very competent NYU team, but played Billy Isaacs as a young military veteran, as opposed to the older, more experienced gentleman that we're seeing here. How do you sort of sift out your strategy when it comes to casting witnesses for roles?
Well, you have to match the right character with the right role. And I'll be honest with you, I think Princeton, they had a great character there, but I think they miscast him because, someone that old and that feeble who could barely walk up to the bench isn't going to be operating an amusement park ride. I'm not sure he could really walk through the amusement park on a regular basis. With that said, we're in a fantasy land here. We're in the state of Midlands. It doesn't exist. And they're trying to score points. They're trying to, impress and entertain the judges. And I think they did a very good job of that. UCLA's cross was very strong, though. So we'll see what the third witness has to offer. What do we have on the Twitter feed?
Yeah, we've got a flurry of comments coming on here. A lot of viewing parties happening at campuses across the country. I think it's including your alma mater, if I'm remembering
my own
right?
My own students in Cincinnati are watching. They posted a picture. My lovely children, including to the very far right of their picture, a senior of mine, Bennett Moss, who's graduating and attending the University of Texas Law School in the fall. I could not be prouder of him.
That's fantastic.
And I'm excited that they're watching and hopefully listening right now.
Our character's being enjoyed. Ambalum says, watching the witnesses is the best part of this entire broadcast. Not us, I mind you. It takes guts to do a full character. Another one coming.
Everybody ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Before we call our next witness, can we set up a chart in the well?
Yes. Have you shown it to opposing counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection?
If proper foundation isn't laid before showing the chart, then yes, Your Honor. But as
Okay.
to setting it up there, no objection.
Okay, so set it up facing the opposite way so that
Absolutely.
or if you'd like, if it's going to be facing the witness as the witness comes in, you may want to leave it down until the witness passes the easel, maybe against your table.
Yes, Your Honor.
There we go.
May I move to see it when it's used?
Yes. Anytime there's a chart in the way, feel free either side to relocate. Okay?
Thank you, Your
You don't
Honor.
have to ask permission anymore. Call your next witness, please, State.
The state calls Mr. J.C. Longstreet to the stand.
Good afternoon, Mr. Longstreet.
Yes.
You may proceed, State.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
I'm Jack Longstreet.
Where do you work?
I own Rockter World Amusement Park in Breckinridge County. It's just a couple of miles down the road.
Could you tell us a little bit more about Rockter World?
Sure. When I moved to Midlands, Rockter World was pretty old. It was run down. So when I had saved up enough money, I bought the park and fixed it up. Now I'd say that Rockter World is one of Midland's premier family attractions.
Oh, Mr. Longstreet, were you at Rockter World on August 30th, 2012?
I was. I was there when everything happened.
Do you know the defendant, Whitney Bowman?
I do. Whitney worked at my park for the 2011 and 2012 park seasons.
What about a man named Cameron Poole? Do you know him?
I know Cameron, too. Cameron also worked at the park, but only during the 2012 park season.
How did Mr. Poole come to work at your park?
Whitney recommended that I hire Cameron Poole.
How did that happen?
We were talking about a possible raise for Whitney, and then Whitney started telling me about a friend of hers named Cameron Poole, and how Cameron would be a perfect fit for the ticket booth, so I hired him.
Now, after you hired Mr. Poole on the defendant's recommendation, did you ever see the two of them together?
Sure. I saw them together quite frequently, especially toward the end of August of 2012.
Now, Mr. Longstreet, you said that you were at Rockter World on August 30th. Do you remember where you were around 8 p.m. that day?
I do. I was in the main office of the park.
Did you stay in your office for the rest of the day?
No, I didn't. A couple of minutes after that, I heard a scream coming from outside, so I left the office to see what was going on.
Where did you go when you heard the scream?
I ran to our main ticket booth, the front entrance area.
What did you find when you got to the ticket booth?
When I first got there, I saw that our accountant, Miss Haley Floyd, she was the one screaming.
How was Miss Floyd acting when you found her at the ticket booth?
Well, when I got a bit closer, she collapsed to the ground. She was shaking all over, and I saw that her face was pale.
Did she say anything to you at that point?
She did. She told me that the ticket booth had just been robbed at knife point, that Cameron Poole had approached her with a knife, threatened to carve her face up, and took all of the money in the ticket booth.
Mr. Longstreet, one of the key questions that we have to answer in court today is how much money was taken from Rockter World on August 30th.
Sure.
Do you know how much money was taken from the ticket booth that day?
I don't know the exact figures for how much money we had there at that time, but I did look at the midday receipts for that day, and I also brought along a chart that I had compiled that shows about how much money we took in every day.
Before we show that chart to the jury, could you tell us exactly what it's going to show?
Sure. It's a chart of the average daily revenues for our ticket booth over the entire 2012 park season.
And how did you make